the news update this week, we've got a story out of Texas that you did, right? The Texas Governor Greg Abbott, he's reacting to the Uvalde shooting with some actual, policy that he wants to see implemented, or I guess he wants to see it more aggressively pursued by prosecutors in the state. Is that right? Can you tell us a little bit about it? You wrote a story.
Yeah, that's right. So Tuesday this week, he sent out a letter to the Texas District and County Attorneys Association, which, as the name suggests, just represents the various prosecutors across the state. And he essentially was just encouraging them to use their new lie and try law. They passed a bill last year in their legislative session that makes it a state felony for someone to lie on a background check form in order to obtain a gun illegally. So basically, he was just suggesting to them, hey, we have this lie and try law. I want you to aggressively pursue these, train your prosecutors to look out for these signs, and then actually actively prosecute them. And he was suggesting that was a way to try to crack down on shootings like what happened in Uvalde.
And so that's interesting for a couple of reasons, right? But one of them is so why would the state pass their own version of this law, right? It's already federal law, right?
Right.
That it's a federal felony to lie on the background check form. So why did they pass this law? Why does Abbott think it's important?
Yeah. So as you said, it is already a federal crime. And it happens several hundred times a year, if not thousands of times a year, where folks do lie on background checks. But where Texas decided to make it their own crime is the fact that the federal government pretty rarely prosecutes those violations. You see this is a common critique. If you're a gun rights advocate, you're probably familiar with this, is the fact that we don't really enforce these laws on the books. And it's sort of one of those instances where, yeah, the background check system maybe will flag someone that lied, but it really won't be followed up. Like ATF won't follow up with them, or it'll get referred to local federal prosecutors in whatever district
right.
the offense occurred in, and it just charges won't be filed, or, so it's very rare to actually see that get prosecuted. So Texas said, if it happens in our state, we'll follow up and treat it as a state issue instead of relying on federal prosecution.
Yeah. And I think that's fairly common that you'll have these state statutes that are similar in nature to federal statutes, just so that
right.
you can have two different jurisdictions go after the problem.
Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, when it comes to background check denials, you'll have like 100,000 of those a year. And then some of those, really only a small percentage actually get referred to DOJ for prosecution. And then even among those, only a small percentage actually get prosecuted. And then
right.
beyond that, even only really a very small number get convictions or plea deals right. out of the prosecution. So it is, it's one of these issues that's commonly talked about in the gun world as, something that is needs to be fixed. I guess you hear this a lot. And so Texas took that step to make it a state law, a state crime. And now I guess Abbott he's really just saying, like, please use this law.
Right.
I guess the other interesting aspect of this is, well, one, like, this wouldn't have had anything to do with Uvalde. It wouldn't have stopped
right.
the shooter in Uvalde. So just to be clear on that, because he wasn't a prohibited person. He didn't lie on a background check to get his guns, as far as we know. And so it wouldn't have had any impact on his particular situation. I guess this is one of those things where it's a solution for other potential shootings, or to prevent shootings going forward. But the other interesting aspect of it is this seems to be more of the response to Uvalde inside of Texas.
Right.
You're not seeing the governor push for new gun restrictions or even something like a red flag law.
Right.
Instead, he's pointing to stricter enforcement of current laws, right?
Right. No, that's exactly right. I thought you made an interesting point on Twitter the other day when you contrasted this experience to Florida's after Parkland. Because you see, they're similar, not the same, but similar political dynamics, both trifecta red states. Florida's getting even more red. And the fact that, after Parkland happened, they were willing to go ahead and pass a couple gun control bills. They raised the age of purchase for rifles, for semi-automatic rifles to 21. They passed a red flag law. So we wondered maybe would Texas potentially dip their toe in the water and consider something like that? And I think this kind of makes it clear that they're going to go down the route of, hey, we already have laws on the books. Make sure you just enforce them better. And that's the way we're going to try to tackle this issue. So I think that's an interesting thing to see, especially because it's an election year and it's one of the biggest red states in the country, to see how they're going to handle these types of shootings.
Yeah, I talked a little bit about that with Burgess on in the main interview, but I think that's the biggest takeaway from this story is like this is what the response is from Texas Republicans, and it's interesting to see John Cornyn, one of the senators from Texas who's Republican, pushing a different a different strategy at the federal level, which is to do this framework, this gun deal. That does include some restrictions, or at least on, expanding what domestic violence entails to fit boyfriends, abuse by boyfriends into that definition, and then this new background check process that they're looking at. So it's interesting to see the divergence there from the state officials and the federal officials out of Texas, even the ones in the same party. And so I think that's why this story is particularly useful to understand.
Right. So and it's also interesting because it is an election year. Obviously, he's up for his governor's seat this November, and his challenger is one of the leading proponents of new gun control.
Right.
To see how this might affect the political dynamic. Obviously, Beto O'Rourke's been outspoken. He crashed that press conference Abbott was giving in the aftermath of Uvalde. He's since doubled down again about confiscating AR-15s. And there's been some polling to come out to show that there's a plurality in Texas that actually want new gun control laws as a response of Uvalde, but it doesn't seem to be hindering Abbott's lead in the polls. And in fact, Abbott's lead appears to be widening because there's a new poll out this week that shows him with a 19-point lead over O'Rourke, which is actually an increase in his lead. So I think that's a fascinating thing to point out, that the political dynamics don't necessarily work out the way you might expect.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's it's fascinating to watch the diverging strategies there and see their political impact, which we're going to see much more immediately in the Texas gubernatorial election than we will in, how these Republicans who vote for this framework fare, because Cornyn's not up for election for a while.
Right.
And of the 10 Republicans signed on, 4 of them are retiring.
Right.
And another couple aren't, the rest aren't up for election anytime soon. So, that's interesting political dynamics there. It seems like, I don't know, Republicans at the federal level maybe view this as, as I said earlier, during the other interview, a pressure relief valve, but it's like, how are the politics actually playing out? I think you'll see it more clearly in the Texas gubernatorial election, because that's coming up now, and Abbott is taking a different tact than the Senate Republicans are on how to respond to the shooting, and he's going with enforce our current laws more strictly, and they're going with make some gun reforms, some changes to federal gun law to make it a little more restrictive. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I mean, so far, like you said, it seems Abbott's strategy is not hurting him politically. And because you got that very clear contrast. I mean, Beto's on the very far left of this issue, and Abbott's in the traditional Republican right side of the issue, where he's saying, don't pass new gun laws, instead enforce the current gun laws that we have. So how that plays at the polls in Texas should tell us something significant, because, Texas is still very much a red state, but it is trending bluer.
Right.
I don't think so. It could give us a decent barometer of where these strategies are headed.